Welcome, Peter Gelb. It's such an honor and pleasure to talk to you today. So you are the general manager of the largest opera house of the world, 3,800 seats and standing room, I think almost 3,000 employees, and an operating budget of over $300 million. And yet your opera house is closed, has been since March 12th. How did you feel when you had to announce the closure of the rest of the season and then the fall season? And how do you feel now?
Well, this has been a very difficult and surreal experience from the beginning, and it doesn't get any less strange, certainly as we see the events taking place in the world. And, obviously the Met may be the largest opera house, but it's a very small part of society when you consider the scale and scope of the impact and the devastation that is taking place in this country and in other parts of the world. We are merely a small player in this larger picture. But it's it's running an institution like the Met with its 3,000 employees, most of whom are on furlough at the moment, is a difficult challenge even in the best of times. And because the economic structure of an opera house today is barely viable to begin with, and to have the added stress of this economic disaster that's befallen us certainly just makes it that much more difficult, a lot more difficult. I mean, so these are very strange times, and for people running opera companies, for people working in opera companies, for people who wish they could be going to hear opera performances, for everybody in every walk of life.
For sure.
Certainly every aspect of my life has been affected by what's going on today.
Yeah, thank you. One of the extraordinary things I think that the Met has been doing right after the lockdown is to offer free streamings every single evening. And I think the Met has heralded that other opera houses are offering digital festivals or a selection of shows or one show a night in a week, but you do one show a night. I think at the beginning there were like 70,000 people watching every evening. How has that initiative developed, and what responses have you received from that?
Well, you have to understand the history of the Met to understand the importance of its media activities and how they have been so impactful on the company and the world of opera lovers. The Met is uniquely placed amongst performing arts companies in that since we believe so strongly in the distribution of our content via electronic means, that we have a global audience. The Met Live in HD transmissions to movie theaters that take place in better times, when we're performing, reach paying audience in cinemas of between 200,000 and 400,000 people per show. And 70% of those people are outside of the United States. So it just gives you an idea of how significant its impact is. But the history of the Met and the media goes back many, many decades. It actually began in the early 1930s, interestingly, as a response to the Great Depression, when my illustrious predecessor, Giulio Gatti Casazza, the Italian impresario who moved from running a La Scala in the early 1900s to taking over the Metropolitan Opera House, towards the end of his very long tenure, I think last 30 years or so, launched the series of radio broadcasts across the United States to reach a generation of Americans who otherwise would have been deprived of kind of any cultural enrichment. And the Met radio broadcasts proved to be a pioneering venture of an arts company and media that lasts to this day. It has a history that is more than 80 years old, and really is kind of the foundation for what the Met did under my watch when I began as general manager 14 years ago and launched these live transmissions into movie theaters, and also expanded our radio presence by creating a 24-hour opera channel devoted to the Met on Sirius XM, the digital radio service. So, and before I launched this venture of transmissions into movie theaters, which was really the first of its kind 14 years ago, the Met had been also a pioneer in the use of standard television and live opera performances, going back to the late 70s, which I think the first broadcast for public television was in 1977 or 78 when Luciano Pavarotti and Renato Scotto performed in La Boheme together for the television cameras. So there's a long history of media activity at the Met, and during the pandemic, the value of it became all the more apparent because we have this enormous library of content, both pre-live in HD and post. So altogether, several hundred programs and several thousand hours of programming that I felt it would be very important to make available to the public as soon as the pandemic hit and as soon as we stopped performing. We lost the last 8 or 9 weeks of our season, which normally would have extended into early May. And in March, when we ceased performing, we immediately began transmitting these free nightly streams to the public. And they were a big hit. We had a captive audience, sadly, in that people were literally captive in their own homes. And they responded with, actually the numbers were enormous initially. Hundreds of thousands of people flocked to the Met website and watched these nightly operas. The averages at the beginning of the first weeks and early months were several hundred thousand, culminating in a live, what we called the Met at Home Gala, which was watched by 750,000 people, which was done with extremely low tech, in which the opera singers themselves homebound were connected via Skype connections and sang into their iPhones and basically functioned as their own camera operators and sound technicians and gaffers. And basically they produced themselves under our watchful eye. And now, of course, we've just launched this new endeavor, which is a much more high-tech, highly produced series of recitals featuring leading opera stars, which just began last Saturday with Jonas Kaufmann in Munich. So, the Met's use of media has been crucial to its success in reaching a larger audience during normal times, and in these very abnormal times, it's been crucial in keeping the Met connected to its audience. And in fact, perhaps ironically, during the pandemic, while we've been offering all of this content, we've actually increased the number of opera lovers, I believe. In fact, we have added to our database more than 150,000 new names of people who we didn't have before, who have registered with the Met, and some of whom have actually discovered opera during the pandemic, thanks to these Metropolitan Opera transmissions. And we also have added about 30,000 new donors. So, of course, none of that is going to be the solution to our problems as the health crisis continues and as we grapple with the future. But it's been a great temporary band-aid, if you will, to help the Met and to help inspire donations from our loyal supporters, who enjoy and feel the Met and who feel proud to see the Met engaging the public in such a positive way.
Yeah, that's great. The Met Stars Live and Concert series that just started is combining focus on individual singers. We have 12 of the greatest opera stars around across Europe and the United States and elsewhere. And you also place a lot of emphasis on the location. How does that work? Who chooses the locations, and what kind of gap are you trying to fill with that? What interest do you think will that create?
Well, basically what we're trying to do is provide stimulation for the public. My whole life as a producer, entrepreneur of classical music, long before I came to the Metropolitan Opera, has been devoted to connecting artists with the largest number of people possible. And seeing a situation where in this country, we're literally, artists are in straitjackets. They can't travel, they can't move. In Europe, the situation is somewhat better, but not much better, in the sense that there are performances taking place, but under very controlled, limited circumstances with socially distanced audiences. And I personally, I think it's somewhat depressing to be, for the artists and for the public, to be in venues that are only 10% full. And because we're determined to keep the Met in the public eye, and the artists are looking for ways to be connected to the audiences, and the audiences are looking for ways to be connected to the artists, and nobody can travel. So all of this sort of inspired this idea of creating a series of events where the artists can be brought into people's homes, and that they would perform in venues that did not have a public. So we wouldn't have to worry about seeing a depressing, socially distanced public. We'd see no public. We would just see a beautiful location that made sense acoustically. So the choice of these locations is being made sort of in collaboration with the artists. And I've been working on this project over the past 4 or 5 weeks, setting it up. It was all put together very, very quickly, like everything is these days. Opera, we typically in grand opera, we plan 4 or 5 years in advance. Now we're planning 4 or 5 weeks in advance. That's the difference that the health crisis has created. So, in the case of Jonas Kaufmann, we agreed, he and I had a series of conversations, and we agreed that when he accepted the idea of doing this and doing it live, because I want to maintain the excitement. Just to digress for a moment, the thrill for the audiences who watch the Met live in HD in movie theaters is that it is live, because opera fans consider opera singers to be vocal athletes. They are as interested in a live performance by their favorite opera stars as they are, as sports fans are interested in watching a live athletic endeavor. Nobody wants to watch a taped football game. They want to see it live. And opera fans want to see their favorite singers singing live, because they want to see what they will do in these artistically exciting and stressful circumstances, and how they will deliver their high notes is as exciting as an athletic audience watching a pole vaulter, seeing if they're going to clear the bar. So knowing that, we try to, this series is meant to sort of, I wouldn't say check off a number of boxes, but just seems like a natural kind of hybrid whose time has come. Hopefully its time will be limited by our returning to performing, but I wanted to come up with something that would be exciting and stimulating for the artists and for the audience. So this is what we came up with, and we'll see how it evolves. But in the case of Jonas Kaufmann, he was performing in this abbey that he chose, and which we did a location scout. Of course, I'm producing all of these things from New York, and what makes these shows particularly unusual is the director of the cameras. In the case of the Kaufmann recital, there were 6 cameras. They were all being directed by Gary Halverson, who normally is the director of our live and HD shows, and he was directing them from New York. through the best technology possible, we were able to place his voice in the ears of the cameramen in Germany with only a 1 or 2 frame delay. So, which is, about an eighth or ninth of a second. And so he was able to direct in real time the cameras. I was sitting next to him producing and talking to the lighting director and video engineers. And so we were able to actually control the show from New York. And then it came back via satellite to New York, where it was being put together live with our host, the soprano Christine Gerke. And the premise behind that was the idea. I've asked the singers to sing programs that would appeal to the widest taste of our broad opera audience around the world. So instead of being a lieder recital, for example, this was a recital of, in the case of Jonas Kaufmann, 12 big tenor arias. So he needed breaks between groups of arias, and that consisted of our adding in New York highlights of previous performances of his from the Met stage. So it's a very unusual hybrid kind of presentation, but it seems to have been received very well. And each location and the locations we've chosen are all in the vicinity of where the artists are located. So, for example, the next recital, which takes place on August 1, is in the historic mansion known as Dumbarton Oaks, which has historical significance and has a beautiful music salon where Renee Fleming, who lives nearby in Virginia, will be performing her recital. And then 2 weeks after that, Roberto Alagna and his wife, the very gifted soprano Alexandra Kreuzer, are performing a recital of arias and duets, but near where they're currently ensconced in Antibes, and the actual location of their concert will be on the hill, on the cliff of that runs in the town of Aise in the south of France. There's a fantastic hotel that's sort of carved out of rock, and they have these terraces overlooking the Mediterranean. So that will be an outdoor event with the two of them and a quintet from Vienna playing orchestrations of popular operatic material. And so it goes on.
Fantastic. So it sounds like each concert will also have its own flavor, its own location, its own take.
Right. And at a time when people can't travel, it also gives them a chance to see things that they can't get to see. So.
We all wished we could be there. I was surprised to see you in the production booth in Manhattan, clasping your mask. It seemed like when you were talking to Christine Gerke. Will you produce or co-produce or be part of all of these concert productions?
Well, I'm producing all of them. I don't think I necessarily will have a presence in all of them, but I wanted to, since that was the first one, I wanted to explain to the audience why we were doing it and what to expect.
Great. What I find so interesting about this series and also the at-home gala is that they really shift focus, they shift the attention to the individual singers, the great stars of opera, of course, that we all enjoy hearing. I'm wondering, do you think that the new viewing and listening habits that we are all developing now during the COVID era will change expectations for opera on the long run, or may even change opera on the long run?
I don't know the answer to that question. I do know that the live in HD presentations have had a profound influence already on opera, because it has made it clearer to opera singers how important it is to live the roles they're performing in. Opera singers sometimes, or I shouldn't say sometimes, in the past, opera singers were sort of often given a free pass when it came to theatricality and the inhabiting dramatically of the parts they were playing. Those days are long gone. And the live in HD shows at the Met, I think, have helped, and other opera houses, audiovisual presentations have helped in ridding those kind of non-theatrical practices of singers, or getting rid of them, because singers know that they're going to be seen in close-up. They have to be in character all the time when they're on stage. Of course, that kind of theatrical evolution was already happening, thanks largely to the movement of Europe, I would say more so in Europe, where European stage directors and had already started, working much more intensely on the complete theatrical realization of operas. And certainly it's been my goal since I came to the Met to bring in leading stage directors from Europe, as well as from, Broadway and the West End, to, who aren't satisfied with just having singers parking and singing on the stage. They view the best directors view opera as a fully theatrical art form, recognizing technically how much harder and challenging it is for singers to sing while acting. But the expectation that they have and I have of singers today is that they are actors as well as singers, and opera audiences will have nothing less than that now. They're used to it.
Yeah, and that's of course the aspect that we are missing right now. The acting, the being on stage, having the whole thing. Now, one aspect that we are also missing, opera of course involves not just the great singers, but it involves the orchestra, it involves the chorus, it involves all the stagehands, the technicians, the directors, and many of them, as you already mentioned, have been furloughed since the end of March. What does the future hold for them? How will they survive, especially if the lockdown continues for we don't know how long?
Well, this is a very difficult time for all performers who are out of work, which is most performers, unfortunately. In this country, it's critical, of course, that the stimulus package that provides additional revenues to unemployed workers continues, and that's really in the hands. The fate of that is in the hands of Congress, who are wrestling with this new stimulus bill right now. My goal is to find a way forward, but I do know that any possibility of opera returning to full performances in this country relies upon a vaccine, and a vaccine that will be really available. In Europe, in Germany, for example, where the German government, unlike America, where the German government pays all of the salaries and costs of the workers in the theaters, it is possible to, and there actually are performances taking place in Germany right now. And the German government, I speak to my colleagues who run European houses, the German government is actually mandating that opera houses in Germany put on performances, but they're being put on in a way that economically would be absolutely impossible in America. They're being put on with very few performers in the pit, observing correct social distancing, no choruses, essentially, singers who are separated by great distances on the stage, and a handful of people in the audience representing the audience. That certainly, I'm sure it's exciting and important for those artists, and a great opportunity for artists want to perform. That's what they live for. But it certainly isn't grand opera, and economically, it would be completely impossible for us to attempt something like that. The audiences for opera in this country particularly are older, and even though we've worked very hard to try to win new audiences that are younger, and we have succeeded to some degree, but the older audiences are clearly not going to come back to the theaters, and that includes Broadway as well as opera houses, until they believe it is completely safe. They're not, it's one thing to risk your life going to a hospital to have a checkup or buying groceries. It's another thing, going to a theater and sitting for hours in the theater. So, there are many things that will have to change in the future. Certainly, nobody is going to return to the opera house until it is safe, both performers and audience members. And we have to, that's why it's so important for the Met to stay in visible and be active, because in order for there to be a chance for the workers, the orchestra members, the chorus members, the singers to work again at the Met, there has to be a Met for them to return to. So, we can't afford to subsidize everyone's salaries. We don't have the government support to do that. We are providing healthcare benefits to all of our unemployed workers. But the cost of running the Met is so great that it's just not possible to do more than that now. And we just need to be able to be ready to reopen when it is safe.
Which may not be December 31st as is currently planned. Do you have any sense of that yet?
Well, my sense is that December 31 is an unlikely date. When we announced December 31 was about, I don't know, six or 7 weeks ago, I think, at this point. Yeah. And at that point, it seemed more possible than it does today. Certainly, we're not helped by the fact that the pandemic is raging across the country, even if New York City is in better shape. But it makes New York much more cautious, rightly so, about reopening. And it's December 31, I would say, is not going to happen at this point. Our season next season was planned to be longer than recent seasons, in that it was going to extend into early June as opposed to ending in early May. So, my hope is that we will still have a shot at some part of next season, but that it will depend upon a vaccine being available. Not just being available, but being used widely.
Yeah. You already mentioned the subsidies in many European countries and opera houses. Do you sometimes envy your colleagues in Europe? The UK government just gave it almost $2 billion support package for the cultural institutions, including the performing arts. Do you sometimes wish you were active in Europe?
There are advantages to both systems. European companies are envious of the American system because the American companies have been, up until now, very successful in obtaining donations from the private sector, and the Met still is successful in that area. And so in America, the American system, as you know, is one in which private donations replace government subsidies, and the government in turn provides tax incentives to donors, to philanthropists who support the arts in America. There are European companies who have lost support from their government in recent years, who are envious of the American system. Of course, and there are American companies who are envious of the European system. So obviously, it's we'll see in the end who's left standing. But I think that it's not an ideal situation for any company today.
Yeah. The interesting thing you mentioned, you constantly have to rearrange this current season or this upcoming season. You arranged the last season. The irony is that you already did so, but for really happy reasons, which is that this past season, the production of Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, and also of Glasses Agnaten, they were so popular that you actually added more performances of the Gershwin to the current run. Has that ever happened before? And did you foresee that these two works would be so unusually popular?
Well, Porgy and Bess, I knew was going to be popular. I mean, as much as a producer knows anything, of course, it's impossible to know for sure. I believed it would be very popular because it hadn't been produced in New York since the first time it was ever done at the Met, which was in the 80s. And so it had been many years, and it's a piece that has an appeal that crosses over beyond the traditional opera audience. And the production, I thought, was really excellent. We had a great cast, so it had all the markings of a show that would do well. Akhenaten was more of a surprise, a very happy surprise. I mean, in that Philip Glass has a significant following, but there's something about this production which had a kind of a metaphysical, mystical quality to it, including the juggling, that just captured the imagination of the public. Sometimes, you just don't know what's going to. I knew the production was good, and otherwise I wouldn't have wanted to present it. But I didn't realize it would take off the way it did, which was very gratifying. And also, it's that kind of success that gives one hope for the future of opera, because when works that are outside the mainstream repertoire do as well as Akhenaten did, or Porgy and Bess, it makes you realize, someone sitting in my shoes, that the commissioning of new work and the attempt to do new things on stage is the right direction. Opera has no chance of succeeding if it rests on its past laurels. It has to be constantly innovating and moving forward.
Indeed. And in terms of commissions, there have been some really exciting recent developments. In 2018, the Met commissioned the first 2 women composers, Janine Tesori and Missy Mazzoli. I think last year you commissioned an opera to be revised by Terence Blanchard, who will be the first African-American composer to present an opera on the stage. Can you tell us more about these initiatives and maybe other things in the pipeline?
Well, when I came to the Met, we started a commissioning program that was sort of a 2-pronged program. One was more direct commissions, and also there was a developmental program for new work that we put together with Lincoln Center Theater. Andre Bishop, who was the artistic director of Lincoln Center Theater, and I agreed on this collaboration that in which we would be the kind of marriage brokers between young composers and sophisticated theatrical librettists, dramatists, and to try to and stage directors, and bring them all together in a kind of a laboratory situation and try to help push forward new work. And that resulted in several works that made it to the stage of the Met, including Nico Muley's 2 Boys, followed by Marnie, and this fabulous new work by one of the youngest and most successful American composers, Matthew O'Coin, who wrote an opera called Eurydice, which is an opera based on the very successful play by Sarah Rule, the American playwright, who adapted her play and wrote the libretto for this opera, which is the Orpheus story, but from Eurydice's perspective. And like many new works that we commissioned, we launched it not in New York, but in LA, and it actually played in LA in the fall, because our goal with new work is to give them a chance to be performed elsewhere, so that revisions can be made, and because every new work needs something to be done, and
the workshop process.
Right, but this was much more than a workshop. It was the premiere in LA, and it was very successful, and it's a wonderful work, and it will be in the 21-22 season of the Met. Mm-hmm. At the same time, another new work of ours, another work that was commissioned jointly by Lincoln Center Theater and the Met, was about to open at Lincoln Center Theater when the health crisis hit, just literally days away from its opening, mm-hmm. which was an adaptation of Lynn Nottage's play Intimate Apparel. Lynn Nottage, as you know, is one of the leading African-American playwrights in this country. And so her play Intimate Apparel was she herself adapted into a libretto that for an opera written by Ricky Ian Gordon that was about to open at Lincoln Center Theater. And then, when Yannick Nézet-Séguin joined the Met as music director, which is one of the most exciting developments for the Met in recent years, he brought with him his own ideas of composers who he was very interested in championing, including Missy Mazzoli. And Janine Tesori is somebody who I've admired for years through her theatrical work, as well as her classical work. And so they were both added to the program, as remarkably the first two women to be commissioned by the Met. Terence Blanchard's work is, before my previous job, before I came to the Met, I was the head of a record label, Sony Classical, and it was there that I met Terence Blanchard many years ago, and I've known him for many years, and he's a brilliant composer who has had many very successful film scores. He did the film score for Spike Lee's most recent film, and also for Black Klansman, and he has written two operas now. He wrote an opera called Champion, which is autobiographical, an opera based on the life of the former middleweight boxing champion, Emil Griffith. And that was done in St. Louis, which also commissioned Fire Shut Up in My Bones, which is an operatic adaptation of a memoir by Charles Blow, the New York Times columnist. And both of these works were really sophisticated and very emotionally charged, powerful works. And in the case of Fire Shut Up in My Bones, we asked him if he would expand the work for the Met, and which is something he's working on now. So we're very excited about the premiere of that. All of these works are in the case of Fire Shut Up in My Bones, it's, as I said, it's based on the autobiographical memoir of Charles Blow, which is a story of Blow as a young man growing up in the South, a young African-American man growing up in the South, and the sexual, his cousin was a sexual predator who preyed upon him as a child. And the story is kind of a coming of age story about, in spite of this kind of emotional scar that he bore, when he left home to go to college, he was filled with this kind of murderous rage and wanted to come back and get revenge by killing this cousin, and ultimately didn't, and therefore saved his own life in the process. It's a very powerful story. The Janine Tesori opera is based on the play by George Brandt, who also wrote his own libretto for the opera, which originally was a monologue about a U.S. Air Force pilot, female Air Force pilot, who is grounded, hence the title of the play and the opera, because she gets pregnant unexpectedly, and keeps the baby, but in so doing destroys her career in the Air Force because they won't let her fly again. Instead, she stays in the Air Force, but instead of letting her fly, which is where she finds freedom and happiness, she is assigned to an underground secret location somewhere in the Nevada desert, where she is assigned to drone duty and operates 12-hour shifts, commands an assassin drone on the other side of the world, taking out Middle Eastern targets, which gradually drives her crazy. It's a very dramatic but timely story. And the Missy Mazzoli opera is based on the prize-winning book by the novelist George Saunders called Lincoln in the Bardo, which is a very unusual and kind of otherworldly story that takes place mostly in a cemetery outside of Washington, D.C., where various occupants of the cemetery do not accept the fact that they have died, and they're sort of living in this nether purgatory world, and trying to hang on instead of going on to their ultimate destinations of heaven or hell. And the action turns around Abraham Lincoln and his 11-year-old son, Willie, who dies of cholera, and who is transported to the cemetery, and Lincoln keeps visiting him because he doesn't want to let go of his dead son. And in his visits, he connects with these spirits who are haunting this place, and that he becomes the the lever that transforms the action. It's a very unusual story. Anyway, that's the state of some of our opera plots of the future.
That's fantastic, and sounds like you're very excited about that, as I'm sure will be lots of audiences. Are you keeping up with new operas that are being developed elsewhere to scout out new possibilities and composers? And even in New York, there's so much talent right now, and such a vibrancy of the opera scene in terms of prototype festival and young composers.
Absolutely.
Trying out new things.
We have a number of young composers who are still in our program, and we're attracting new young composers to our program. And Paul Cremo, who is the Met's resident dramaturg and driver of our composing commissioning program, is on top of that. We have a talent scout system around the world, and we're also interested in works, as you said, that are being developed in other countries. If not for the pandemic, I would have been in Aix at the end of June to see the premiere of Kaya Sariaho's new opera Innocence, which I'm very interested in, and hopefully might be able to bring to the Met at some point in the future. And John Adams is writing a new opera based on Antony and Cleopatra, the Shakespeare play, that actually was last attempted for the opening of the Met in 1966, but was not a success when that was turned into an opera.
But yes, so we'll have a redo. Fantastic. What other developments you think, what chances might this pandemic bring you and the opera in terms of thinking through what might opera need to develop? You already mentioned new audiences. Do you see any silver lining in terms of having the space now to explore new avenues for opera?
Well, the silver lining is it's a silver lining I wish we didn't have, because I'd much rather there hadn't been a pandemic. But it gives us an opportunity to rethink everything. We have to look at the economics. We have to look at which have long been challenging and impractical. We have to look at the rigidness of the scheduling of opera and try to make it less rigid. We have to think about how we can present more new experiences for our audiences, because clearly if the older audience is going to be reluctant to come back, we're going to have to figure out ways to get new audiences. And it's something we should be doing anyway, and we have been doing, but I think we have to put greater emphasis on it. We're looking at everything from how we schedule operas, what time the curtain time should be, how to make operas shorter. Operas are generally too long, whether it's stripping out intermissions or making cuts in operas that should be cut. There was a long practice, an academic practice, I should add, of believing that operas were only as good as every single note that the composer had written, even when the composer themselves had rejected them. Critical editions of operas have abounded in recent decades that actually made operas longer than they were ever meant to be. And part of I think one of the things that we need to do today is to look at those operas. I'm not talking about the bona fide epics like the Ring Cycle or Parsifal, but which I think should be the length they are, because they are epics. But there are Handel operas and some Verdi and early Verdi operas, and that just don't need to be as long as they are. And I remember there have been these kind of academic exercises that have taken place a couple of years ago. I remember Ricardo Chailly, a conductor who I admire greatly, decided that he had to put on the original version of Madame Butterfly at La Scala for some kind of reasons which are beyond me, which is actually the version that was a failure when it was premiered at La Scala, originally.
More offensive.
I mean, the thing is, composers changed their works according to how they were received, and made cuts and eliminated parts, and there was a reason for that. So why academics feel they had to find these, it's like finding bits of film on the cutting room floor and gluing them back on. Today we can't afford those. Those are kind of indulgencies shouldn't exist. And particularly when we have audiences that do not want to sit for long periods of time, and with the pandemic, is a good reason not to sit for long periods of time, which is it's not healthy. It's healthier to have a more reasonable theatrical experience. So we're looking at all of these things.
Interesting. A lot of Broadway works, but also a lot of new operas kind of adhere to a 90-minute format, often without intermission.
Right.
Could you imagine that for new works, like as a new go-to?
I don't necessarily. I think for new works, it's something to consider. That's not the way we have been counseling opera composers to write works that are no more than 2.5 hours. But certainly there's a place for shorter works than that, I would say, as well. I think. Right now, at the Salzburg Festival, they're planning a 90-minute version of Così fan tutte because they know that nobody will want to go to the restroom. So I don't know. That may be too extreme, but certainly we have to think about all these things.
Fascinating. What are some other challenges you think opera is facing these days, besides the pandemic and the economic challenges?
Well, just being, the biggest challenge is all of those challenges, economic challenges, the running times of operas, the danger opera faces is becoming obsolete. It's nobody. The idea that opera can exist simply because it has existed is a ridiculous proposition, and a recipe for disaster. So we have to be mindful of the fact that every art form has to evolve and adjust to the circumstances in which it exists, the public's tastes. It's not to say that we have to pander to the public, but we have to be able to stimulate them and lead them. It doesn't, pandering to the public doesn't work either. But we can't just sit idly by, and I don't think anybody in my position believes that you can. That might have been the case 20 or 30 years ago, where people who ran opera companies just basically thought they could coast, along. But clearly, that hasn't been the case for some decades, and certainly isn't the case today.
And there's also the fact that opera is originally a European art form. It is often considered to be elite here in this country, but there is also the question of diversification. And we've seen you're doing it on the level of composers and the stories that are being told. Do you have particular plans also for diversifying the singers, the staff, everybody, including then also the audience?
Well, it's essential. It's an essential part of what we're talking about, which is how do you adjust to the society and how do you connect with the society? And certainly every cultural institution is going through a painful, soul-searching process right now that was driven very much by recent events. But it's certainly the right thing to be doing. We are looking at all aspects of the institution, from management levels to the artists we engage, to the makeup of our board, to really all aspects of the institution. And we're taking some very concrete steps right now to make changes. On the other hand, we can't just make change for the sake of making change. We have to make change that's meaningful and that makes artistic sense. The biggest problem with the arts is the pipeline. And that, one of my colleagues was explaining to me the other day, Deborah Border, who runs the New York Philharmonic, was explaining to me that, to become, and she was a former member of an orchestra in her youth, that to become a member of an orchestra, a top orchestra, it starts with the music camp you were selected in America. It starts with the music camp that you've been selected to join, and and then those camps feed into the elite music schools, and those elite music schools feed into the orchestras. So, how do you disrupt that pipeline?
Mm-hmm.
And, part of it is through recruitment of young talent. And the same thing is true, obviously, at the Met, not just with our orchestra, but with our chorus and with our stagehands and with all aspects of the operation. Yeah. So one concrete step we're taking right now is we're eliminating free interns. When I arrived, there was an intern program at the Met where we would bring on interns who would work at the Met in exchange for college credit. We realized that is preventing us from being able to achieve the diversity we want to achieve. So we're creating a paid intern program, and we are going to recruit from schools and to make sure that will help ensure without doing sort of exercising reverse discrimination, will ensure that we are actually creating a much more diverse entry-level workforce at the Met. And this goes across the board, whether it's directors, designers. I mean, we really have to get to the pipeline itself.
Yeah. And you also have a very active education department with they're doing a summer camp right now.
That's right.
That's part of that initiative.
Well, the summer camp, I mean, our education department is fantastic, and they came up with this idea of this summer camp, and it's been a big success. And certainly, it's an opportunity for diversity, and also, just the joyful participation in the operatic process for young people, which they're enjoying very much.
Great. Do you have any secret hopes and ideas or fantasies that you would like opera to take, directions you would like opera to take, even if it may not be right now or anytime soon?
Well, for me, the greatest part of opera is when it can affect people's lives in a meaningful way. Opera at its best is the most glorious art form. It involves all of the performing arts and visual arts, and nothing makes me more excited when we're able to bring new technologies, new artistic ideas to the stage of the Met, and then seeing them have a profound influence on the audience. It doesn't always happen, but when it does, there's nothing more gratifying, both for me personally and for the company and for the audiences. And so I live for those moments, for the moments when we can actually have a positive effect and change people's lives.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. So do you think that opera will survive this moment and that the Met will survive?
I think opera will survive. Whether the institutions survive is another story. It's sort of like, when the CD died, people, or when the CD started failing and people started streaming their music instead of buying physical product. The music didn't die; the CDs died. So I believe opera is very strong. There are great artists who want to sing opera. There are composers. More composers are writing new music than ever before. I think the art form will survive. There's no question it will survive. The question is, in what form will it survive? And whether the institutions that or these hallowed theaters that have presented opera historically over decades, centuries. The Met's 137 years old. Whether they survive is another story. And but they will survive if the people who are involved in these companies, from top to bottom, are willing to accept the fact that there is no free pass into the future, that we have to all work together to find new ways to make it possible. In a way, one of the greatest assets of the Met the Opera House itself, which has 3,800 seats, as you I think said at the beginning of our talk, and which has also, you didn't mention, some of the greatest, maybe the greatest acoustics, certainly of a theater its size, and better than many smaller theaters. Opera singers love singing on the stage in the Met. They hear their voices coming back to them, which is what a singer wants to hear when they're singing. And it's one of the most exciting moments for me is being in the auditorium when a terrific new singer who hasn't yet sung at the Met gets on the stage and sings for the first time, and the look in their faces and their eyes of amazement and joy at knowing how wonderful the acoustics are in a theater that they were probably scared would swallow them whole, but instead actually is a great platform for their singing. That's always very exciting for me to witness. But that great asset is also our greatest liability, because this amazing theater, with all of its wonderful acoustics, its history, its past glories, is also kind of an albatross. It's this huge, ungainly, monstrous edifice that makes it very difficult to be nimble and flexible. Ideally today we would have an opera house that could maybe expand to 3,800 seats, but then also shut down and turn into 12 mini plexes of opera houses. I'm jealous whenever I go to the public theater on Lafayette Street and see all the different rooms and theaters and different shows going on. I wish we had the flexibility to do that. Unfortunately, the economics of the Met are so extraordinarily challenging, and now more than ever, that I'm not able to realize a lot of the plans I would like to put into effect, which include smaller venues where opera can be experimented with, and so instead of that, the Met. In fact, one of the projects that we lost because of the pandemic has been to collaborate with other institutions. We were planning on putting on, co-producing or participating, I should say, in the BAM presentation of Missy Mazzoli's Breaking the Waves that was going to be conducted by Yannick, our music director, and include a chamber orchestra of Metropolitan Opera orchestra players, which was my attempt to create a mini Met outside of the Met.
Yeah.
But those kind of projects we will be looking at again for the future. That will give us flexibility.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter Gelb, for talking with me today. And I'm sure audiences will be thrilled to hear your ideas and plans for the future. And best of luck to you personally, to the Opera House, to all the artists involved, and all the best wishes. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Very nice talking to you. And we will need your good luck wishes, because it's a hard road ahead of us. But one that we will be able to travail if we keep working as hard as we can to achieve the right results.
Thank you, Peter Gelb.
Thanks a lot.